talk about agile software development from the perspective of the product owner. Here's Pat. She's a product owner. She has a product vision that she's really passionate about. She doesn't know the details of what her product is going to do, but she knows why we're building the product, and what problem it's going to solve, and for whom. She talks about it all the time. Here are the stakeholders. They're the people who are going to use and support or in any way be affected by the system being developed. Pat's vision is that these people here will love our system and use it all the time and tell their friends about it. The stakeholder needs and Pat's ideas are expressed as user stories here. For example, if this was a flight booking system, people need to be able to search for a flight, and maybe that would be one user story. Both Pat and the stakeholders have lots of ideas, so Pat helps turn these into concrete user stories. Now, somebody has to actually build the system. So here they are, a small, co-located, cross-functional, self-organizing development team. Since this is an agile team, they don't save up for a big bang release at the end. Instead, they release early and often. In this case, they usually release about 4 to 6 stories per week. So that is their capacity. Capacity is easy to measure. Just count the number of stories released per week. Some stories are big, so they count as 2. Some are small and count as a half. But all in all, it adds up to about 4 to 6 stories per week. Some people call these story points, but I'm just going to call them stories per week. In order to maintain this pace and not get bogged down by manual regression testing, the team invests heavily in automated testing and continuous integration. So every story has at least one automated acceptance test at the feature level, and most of the code has automated unit tests. The problem is, here are a bunch of stakeholders asking for all kinds of stuff, and they sure aren't going to be limited to 4 to 6 ideas per week. They have lots of ideas and lots of wishes, and every time we deliver something to them, they'll get even more ideas and ask for even more stuff. So what happens if we try to please them, try to do everything they ask for? We'll get overflow. Suppose the team starts working on 10 news stories per week. If the input is 10, and the output is 4 to 6, the team will get overloaded. That will cause multitasking, demotivation, and all kinds of bad stuff, and ultimately it'll lower output and lower quality. It's a lose-lose proposition. It's kind of like trying to shove more paper into a printer to make it print faster, or shoving more cars onto an already crammed highway system. It just doesn't work. It just makes things worse. So what do we do about this? Well, the Scrum and XP way of avoiding this problem is called yesterday's weather. The team says, well, the past few weeks, we've finished 4 to 6 features per week. So which 4 to 6 features shall we build this week? And the product owner's job is to figure out of all possible stories in the whole universe, which 4 to 6 stories shall we deliver next? The Kanban way is to limit work in progress, or limit WIP, W-I-P. Suppose the team decides that 5 is the optimal number of stories to be worked on simultaneously. They've learned that that's just enough to keep everybody busy without causing overload. So they decide that 5 is their WIP limit. Whenever they finish one story, they'll accept one new story, thereby making sure that they never break the limit of 5 ongoing stories. Both of these approaches work fine, in the sense that the team will have just enough work to do and they'll be able to work fast and effectively. A side effect, though, is that there will be a queue forming in front of the team, and that queue in Scrum is called a product backlog. The queue needs to be managed. Suppose stakeholders keep asking for 10 new stories every week, and the teams deliver 4 to 6 stories every week. That means the queue will just keep getting longer and longer, right? So before you know it, you have a 6-month-long wish list in the backlog, and growing. That means that on average, every story that the team delivers is something that somebody asked for 6 months ago. How agile is that? So there's really only one way to stop the queue from getting out of control, and that word is no. It is the most important word for product owner, and Pat practices it every day in front of the mirror. Saying yes to a new feature request is easy, especially if it only means adding it to an ever-growing backlog. The most important job for product owner is to decide what not to build, and take the consequences of that decision. And that's why it's hard, of course. The product owner decides what goes in and what goes out. The product owner also decides the sequencing. What do we build now? What do we build later? And how long does this list actually need to be? That is a hard job, so Pat doesn't do it alone. She does it in collaboration with the team and the stakeholders. To be able to prioritize, the product owner must have some idea of the value of each story, as well as the size. Some stories are critically important, and others are just bonus features. Some stories take just a few hours to build, and others take months. Now, guess what the correlation is between story value and story size? That's right, none. Bigger doesn't mean better. Think of any system that you've used, and I bet you can think of at least one really simple feature that is very important, that you use every day, and I bet you can think of at least one huge complicated feature that is totally unimportant. Value and size is what helps Pat prioritize intelligently. Like here, these two stories are roughly the same size, but of different value. So build this one first. And over here, these two stories have roughly the same value, but different size. So build this one first, and so on. Okay, that sounds easy enough, but wait a sec. How does she know the value of a story? And how does she know the size? Well, here's the bad news. She doesn't. It's a guessing game. And it's a game that everyone is involved in. Pat continuously talks to stakeholders to find out what they value. And she continuously talks to the team to find out what they think is big or small in terms of implementation effort. These are relative guesses, not absolute numbers. I don't know what this apple weighs, or that strawberry, but I'm pretty sure that the apple weighs at least 5 times as much, and that the strawberry tastes better, to me at least. And that's all Pat needs to know in order to prioritize the backlog. It's pretty cool that way. At the beginning of a new project, our guesses will inevitably suck. But that's okay, the biggest value is really in the conversations rather than in the actual numbers. And every time the team delivers something to real users, we learn something and get better at guessing both value and size. That's why we continuously prioritize and estimate. Trying to get it all right from the beginning is pretty dumb because that's when we know the least. So the feedback loop is our friend. Prioritization is not enough though. In order to deliver early and often, we need to break the stories down into bite-sized pieces, preferably just a few days of work per story. We want this nice funnel shape with small clear stories at the front and more vague stories at the back. By doing this breakdown in a just-in-time fashion, we can take advantage of our latest insights about the product and user needs. All this stuff I've been talking about, estimating the value and size of stories, prioritizing, splitting, all that is usually called backlog grooming. Pat runs a backlog grooming workshop every Wednesday from 11 to 12. 1 hour per week. The whole team is usually there, and sometimes a few stakeholders as well. The agenda varies a bit, but sometimes it focuses on estimation, sometimes on splitting stories, and sometimes on writing acceptance criteria for a story, etc. So I hope you're noticing the theme here, communication. Product ownership is really all about communication. When I ask experienced product owners what it takes to succeed, they usually emphasize passion and communication. So it's no coincidence that the first principle of the Agile Manifesto is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So the product owner's job is not to spoon feed the team with stories. That's boring and ineffective. Pat instead makes sure everybody understands the vision, that the team is in direct contact with stakeholders, and that there is a short feedback loop in terms of frequent deliveries to real users. That way the team learns and can make daily trade-off decisions on their own, so Pat can focus on the big picture. Let's take a look at a few of the trade-offs that need to be made by Pat and the team. First of all, there's a trade-off between different types of value. Early on in a project, uncertainty and risk is our enemy. There's business risk. Are we building the right thing? There's social risk. Can these people build it? And there's technical risk. Will it work on the platform that we want to run it on? Will it scale? And there's cost and schedule risk. Can we finish the product in a reasonable amount of time for a reasonable amount of money? Knowledge can be seen as the opposite of risk. So when uncertainty is high, our focus is knowledge acquisition. We focus on things like user interface prototypes and technical spikes or experiments. Maybe not too exciting for the customers, but still valuable